and then turn it over to Alex Jovanovich with our Parks and Recreation Division.
Thanks, Shauna. I'm Alex Jovanovich. I'm the Community Services Deputy Director for Parks. Thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm really excited to provide, for us to be able to provide the community the working draft plan and an opportunity to provide feedback on the plan objectives, recommendations, success metrics, and prioritization for the management, maintenance, and improvement of the preserves. I don't want to delay getting into it, so we can go move to the next slide. I'd like to introduce Logan Simpson, who is the consultant working on the preserve management plan, specifically Wayne Colbank and John Southard. So I'll turn it over to Wayne.
Great, thanks, Alex. Appreciate everyone's time and your attending today's meeting. This is going to be workshop number 3 in the development of the management plan. And today we'll be sharing additional findings from the studies we've completed so far, and probably the stuff that most everybody is interested in, an update on some of the key recommendations for the project. So we've got a lot to discuss in today's meeting, so we'll just move along here. The couple things that we're going to identify as part of this will be the purpose of the preserve and the land acknowledgement statement that the city has passed through by resolution. And these are really some background information that you need to know that gives you some context for some of the recommendations and some of the elements that are going to be discussed here. Some of you may see these or hear this for the first time, and others may remember them from the previous workshop. So once we get past those, we'll be looking into the substance of the presentation, which has, you can see here, a rather robust number of elements, but it'll take us a little while to get through this. One item I would like to mention is that the draft, working draft management plan will be available online, is available online. And I'm sorry, Shauna, I've forgotten the address for that, but we do have a QR code as well for a survey that you can take to respond to several questions about the project that we're asking to try to get some additional information from you related to that. So let's just move forward then with that as a background. This slide is really just intended to share what is the purpose of the preserve. And again, this was approved by City Council. It's to establish and protect the resources while providing general access, trying to maintain the preserves in a natural, pristine state as much as possible, and limiting the facilities or improvements that happen there. Now, each of the 2 preserves, Hayden Butte and Papago, were created through resolutions by City Council, approved by City Council. Each one has slightly different wording, but the overall intent of which is to preserve them and take conservative actions to keep them in as natural state as possible. The land acknowledgement is, again, an item that was approved by Council. It really is a recognition that the lands of the preserves have been important and are critical to the self-definition of the O'odham and the Peepash peoples. And the city is committed to stewarding these lands and pledges to consider that commitment in every action and every decision that's made about these preserve areas. As part of the project that we've been working on here, we've done several different cultural resource investigation types, one being a Class 3 survey. Class 3 survey is where the archaeologists walk in a grid pattern across the site and look for any cultural sites that might be found. There's been a fair amount of tribal outreach. There have been planning meetings that have been held with SRPMIC, the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community, and I should say that SRPMIC is acting on behalf of the 4 southern tribes and representing their interest in the discussions with the city. So you'll see in further references to SRPMIC, but understand that that is a representation of all the tribes who claim affinity to these lands. Traditional cultural property studies have been done, including having tribal members on site to look at some of these features that are out there in the preserved lands. Here's just a slide that shows the basic properties, the Papago Preserve and the Hayden Preserve, their locations. Obviously, Hayden Butte is a single mass area. Papago is much more broken and has a different, quite a different shape than Hayden Butte itself. But these are the maps. These are the boundaries of each of these preserves. For those of you who remember and have been a part of the prior workshops, you know that we did a fair amount of studies on different elements, including in this case, this happens to be a map of Hayden Butte. This is the contemporary features, which are more the modern features that might be out there, including trails and the water tanks and others. This happens to be trails and trailheads, the mapping, individual mapping of that feature, those features. We've also mapped the vegetation and the flora. We've also mapped other elements as well. Just to give you an example of the kinds of research that we've done here. Similarly, on Papago Preserve, we identified all the different features that might be out there, including poles, fences, signage, and other kinds of elements that are more of a current and not a historic or prehistoric variety. Again, here's a trails map of the trails that are out there as of earlier this summer. And again, a vegetation map showing the different vegetation types. Again, just giving you a bit of the background here on the kinds of studies that we have completed. Now, as part of that, we sort of came to some conclusions here about these different areas within the preserves that have different needs. We are calling them conservation subareas. You could call them management subareas, but I'd like to just spend just a couple seconds to explain what these are. If we look on the left side, this is Hayden Butte. This area H1 is really the southwest portion of the mountain. And this is the area that has highest levels of recreation use. It has most trails, steep terrain, has some erosion problems, and has just great views of downtown. So it's a highly used area, which would mean that it probably will require a greater level of maintenance or other activities to maintain this area as compared to H2, which is the north half of the mountain, which is almost nearly intact, I would say. There are obviously some disturbances there, but it also has other cultural resources in there as well. But you can see the north and the south half of the mountain have unique and different challenges when it comes to maintenance and recreation use. Similarly, if you go on the right side and you look at the Papago preserves, the area near the bottom, the bigger area P1, is very similar to H1 on the Hayden Butte in the sense that it's got quite a bit of recreation use. There are views to downtown. There's some erosion issues, more terrain, things like that. So they're very parallel in that sense. Versus if you take area P3, which has the Sandra Day O'Connor House. It also has the Green Line, which has some unique riparian vegetation. You can see that the needs for maintenance and approach to what goes on in there are different depending on these individual areas. And take P7, which is Hallman Park, that has the lake and has fishing activities, which don't occur really anywhere else in the preserve. You've got the different vegetation around around the lake itself. So you can see there are different focuses that are needed for maintenance and management activities here. So I just wanted to bring your attention to how we looked at some of this information that we gathered and how we brought forward that and as part of the management plan. So the management plan itself, we, through a process of working with the city and the input that we received on the other workshops, have come to this statement of the management goal, which is really very reflective of the language used to establish the preserves. But in this case, it's to ensure the preserves are self-sustaining, natural open spaces compatible with recreation and other necessary appropriate uses while honoring the site's resources, cultural resources, or natural resources, cultural heritage, and intrinsic value. So that's the basic goal that we're shooting for here with this management plan. In yellow, you see some language here that we just want to bring your attention to, which is basically the definition of conservation, because while we're calling this a management plan, it really is a conservation plan, which is to protect and preserve and to take whatever restorative actions are necessary. So really you could use the terms interchangeably here in this regard, but we want to make sure that that idea of conservation is really carried through here on the projects. Now, as part of what we did, we came up with these management plan objectives, and these are really the ways in which we are going to achieve the primary goal that we just discussed there. So number one is to make sure we identify all the significant resources, natural, cultural, and infrastructure. Two is to develop effective maintenance and practice and policies to support those. Three is to define any permitted temporary or permanent uses or features. Four is establishing the resources, primarily city forces, maintenance folks to maintain the preserves. Enter into an MOU as appropriate with SRPMIC, and I probably should explain an MOU is essentially a document that when you have properties that have cultural resources on them as these do, the MOU is basically a document that establishes how those resources, what those resources are, and how they will be managed, and the various kinds of protocols that are used to manage those, and what kinds of communication is necessary. Because ultimately, there likely will be additional fines, or could be additional fines. There may be need to make changes to some of the trails, and where those might affect some cultural resources. An MOU document is a tool that's used to allow the city and the tribes to agree on how that's all going to happen. Moving on with some other objectives, we're trying to foster a continuous input with SRPMIC. The city already has quarterly meetings with them, but we want to make sure those continue and into the future. 7 is developing a recreation trails assessment, because we know we got lots of trails out there. Some of them may need to go away. Some of them need to be embellished or improved. And so a formal plan, which is not within the scope of this study, was identified as a way to solve some of the trails issues, some of the maintenance issues associated with them. Number 8 is an education program to establish a program for folks who visit the preserves and for those who look online to try to share the benefits and the resources that are there, so to make people much more aware of those resources that are on those sites. Focus our safety, visitor safety through signage. We've got some remote areas, particularly in Papago. And then 10 is elevate the preserve's identity through branding or some marketing. They'll probably never ever have the imagery and the brand that, say, Tempe Town Lake or Mill Avenue have, but certainly our assessment was that other than the folks who really know what they are, many folks are not sure about the preserve status and other resources that are there. Moving on, and these are the last objectives here, is to identify an organization that's nearby the preserves to maybe operate as their headquarters. And one of the suggestions was the Arizona Historical Center that's there near Papago, the Papago Preserve, as an idea. Number 12 is to restore, obviously, the disturbed areas that are out there, the landscaping through restoring the native plants and eradicating all the invasive species and so on and so forth. 13 is to go through and utilize an adaptive management process whereby every so often you stop and gather and determine whether what you're doing is appropriate and it's working or not. That's an adaptive management process. And then 14, lastly, is to assess what partnerships would align with the goals and the objectives for the preserve. So a number of different things that we think, if these objectives are agreed upon and they are focused on, that these would, in many respects, accomplish the goal of keeping the resources of the preserves intact and improved. Now, we're going to move on here to some of the recommendations, which I know many people are going to be interested in. Just wanted to share with you how we got to some of these recommendations, and it's basically been through the input from the workshops. The Tempe Forum online surveys have given us a number of different responses from people of suggestions and recommendations. We've had, as we've indicated before, field meetings with SRPMIC. There have been meetings, Desert Conservation Commission met with various user groups that are currently in, particularly the Papago Preserve. We've made presentations to the Desert Conservation Commission, Historic Preservation Commission, and of course, Community and Neighborhood Services departments have provided their input on these recommendations as well. So I forgot to mention that when we get to this point, Alex will be taking on the presentation. So Alex, I'm going to let you go forward then with the recommendations.
I realized I was muted. Thanks, Wayne. In addition to the 14 objectives that Wayne just shared, there's a whole host of recommendations when you have the opportunity to review the draft plan. The next several slides will include some of those recommendations. It's not our intention to go through each individual one, as well as the slides don't represent every recommendation that's in the draft plan. Those recommendations are essentially then grouped down, and I don't know if that's the right description, but grouped together into some success measures and then ultimately prioritization, which those are what we're seeking some of your input on and feedback. So the recommendations ultimately cover management, maintenance, and improvements of the preserve. I'll spend the next few minutes over the next few slides covering the draft recommendations, but highly encourage you to read through all the recommendations in the entire draft plan that's posted online on the Preserve Management Plan website, or will be posted on there. While we anticipate the plan resulting in projects that might be implemented immediately, there are some recommendations such as necessary additional plans that will need to occur before moving to next steps. You'll see one listed on here, such as a trails assessment or trails plan. Other management recommendations include building upon and expanding on the process that we already utilize, such as communication with the tribal community, which Wayne had referred to earlier in one of the objectives, as well as providing cultural sensitivity training to personnel, to city personnel, contractors, and volunteers that might be out in the preserve. Next slide, please. Regarding maintenance, one of the recommendations is to further assess city staffing needs. Our small but mighty preserves team is relatively new, having only been in existence for 2 years, basically come October, or this past October. Our preserve supervisor and 1 employee, and then a contracted employee are our small but mighty team that work in the preserves. And then the park rangers, they've only been in existence out in the field for the last year. They also hit their 1 year mark at the end of October of being out in the field, or early November. So with those two teams being relatively new, we need to complete a long-term assessment of staffing needs in the preserve. Similar to staffing, there are some other possibilities of expanding on volunteer projects, possibly through a park steward program. So that's kind of what the reference there is on supervising volunteer projects and assessed post-activity. Next slide, please. Other maintenance recommendations are to monitor several key areas and elements of the preserve and to assess some of the temporary uses, such as pre and post event assessments for things like races, mountain bike races, through the preserves, any other type of temporary use or temporary event that might occur. And then, like I said, just continuing monitoring and expand on the monitoring that we have for some of the existing infrastructure assets and elements in the preserve. Next slide, please. When considering improvements to the preserves, oh, I'm sorry. I'm on the wrong slide on my notes here. So recommendations are being made to improve signage, wayfinding, as well as educational signage, and then possibly looking at some other opportunities as well, with the potential of incorporating technology into signage, QR codes, using other technologies out there, such as trails, maps, and those types of things through other organizations. And then building upon the current, some of our current processes, such as a graffiti removal process, really honing in and defining that and solidifying an action plan, making improvements to the action plan so that way we can remediate graffiti as quickly as possible. Next slide, please. Other improvement recommendations are to repair trails, and you probably saw a reference to that on the previous slide as well, when talking about both preserves. In addition to erosion control recommendations, working on trails. This one, particularly for Hayden Butte, is more about the access road that leads up towards the top of Hayden Butte. And then also addressing some of the unauthorized makeshift memorials, or not some of, all of the unauthorized makeshift memorials that have been left in the preserves over time. And then also looking at some of the other elements, and obviously there's a large element on Hayden Butte. There's a large A on there. A lot of people refer to it as A Mountain. So really just needing further assessment of elements like the A, further assessment of the condition and condition of other things on Hayden Butte, not just the A, and then having further discussion about those types of elements. Next slide, please. So similar to Hayden Butte, it's being recommended to evaluate the trails. One specifically listed on this slide is the trailhead leading to Loma del Rio within Papago Preserve, and then also to evaluate the current underpass and looking at opportunities for further connection between the north and south sides of Papago Preserve, with the potential, is there a way to expand an additional or include an additional underpass or some way to connect both the north side and south side of Papago Preserve across Curry, under Curry, over Curry, in some form or fashion. I know I ran through those quickly. I didn't intend to cover each individual recommendation for sake of time, allowing as much time at the end of the presentation for questions and comments. With that, I will turn it back over to Wayne.
Yes, so as part of the management plan, one of the things that we wanted to do is to identify success criteria. Well, we've identified the primary goal here is to maintain and conserve the resources within the preserves, and we've come up with 14 different objectives to achieve that goal. One of the questions then is, how would we know with those goals whether or not we had been successful? And this is a process that utilizes a table or a chart similar to this. And you can see here that this is really just an example. And what we did was we took two of the objectives, number 8 and number 10, those are on the boxes on the left, and we brought them forward. And again, these would be the objectives that would be approved, finally approved. So in this case, we're just talking about 8 and 10. We give them some level of prioritization. Is it low, medium, or high? And you can see here in this case, what we're suggesting is that an education program about the preserves, about the cultural resources, about water and use of water in the desert, things like that are really a high priority. And the metric is, what are you trying to do? In this case, we're trying, whoops, I'm sorry. We're trying to get the users or potential users who might look online greater knowledge about the preserves. And the box to the right, which is the current status, says there's very limited information on the signage that's out there and the online signage as well. The information online as well is needs some upgrades. So we're trying to say, here's what we want to do. Here's the priority we give it. Here's where it stands now. And then the last box on the right is, okay, what would we consider to be success? And in this case, as it relates to the education program, installation of upgraded signage within a year. If that happens, now obviously the length of time here might change a little bit depending on everybody's ultimate comments, but if we had upgraded signage within the preserves in a year, that would be considered successful. And various groups and departments can be utilize this information as part of their own self criteria for success within their groups. If you look at number 10, this says elevate the preserve's identity and branding. Well, maybe it's not the highest priority, but what we're trying to do is increase public awareness. Really, nothing has happened at this point to take action on that. But if we had a branding campaign, in other words, we had a plan for what we were going to do within 2 years, we're suggesting that that would be a successful approach. And of course, obviously, the success criteria depends on implementing these things. Implementing them is a separate matter. What we're trying to do with this management plan is to identify those things that need to happen and when they need to happen to achieve success in this management plan. So that's an example of success criteria and how when you look in the draft report, you will see all 14 of these that we've identified with a similar table like this, and you can comment on what you think about any of those elements, either its priority or its success criteria. One of the last things we've got here is identifying future partners and or funding sources. The partners still to be identified. That really is probably more going to happen as we move into implementation. And what we know is that there are grant sources and other funding sources. We've identified 6 or 7 here that we believe these funding sources would be applicable to the work in the preserves. So we have a leg up here on where we can start looking for any of this money, but the partnerships are still out there to be determined, and certainly any recommendations that you have relative to that would be appreciated. So we need your help. We need your input on the recommendations, the success criteria, and really prioritizing all of these steps and recommendations that we've identified here in this presentation. And again, you'll be able to read all of these in more detail with greater elaboration in the draft report if you choose to go there and look. So just the next steps that we see going forward here, there will be an updated draft report early in December. There will be additional presentations to the Desert Conservation Commission, the Historic Preservation Commission in kind of the January, February timeframes. And then there will be another workshop number 4, which will be in that probably late February timeframe, where we will come back and do a very similar presentation to this, and give you the final recommendations of the plan itself. At that point, the final report will be generated in March, and we anticipate that there will be a council work study session sometime in April-ish to review the document and to determine how to move forward with it. So that is that's what we anticipate. Now, for those of you who want to go and participate in the survey, this is the QR code. You can see that basically from today for the next couple weeks, 3 weeks or so, we want to get your input and your comments. And so feel free to go there and provide any comments. Certainly, we're willing to take some of your comments here today as the time allows to discuss some of those, but certainly feel free to also fill out the survey. So with that, we've completed the presentation and would be glad to take any questions.
Thanks, Wayne. I have a few here in the chat that I'm going to go through first, and then if anyone else has any, please raise your hand or put them in the chat, and we'll go in the order that we receive them. The first comment here is the Papago map should be updated to change the wording from dirt bike jumps to bicycle skills park or something accurately reflecting the usage. Most people read dirt bikes and think it's talking about dirt bikes, which are motorcycles. The area is used by BMX and mountain bikes, which are typical bicycles we all grew up with. Putting dirt bike on the map biases the general public against the use of the area because it inaccurately tells them that motorcycles are used within the preserve. This is misinformation that will result in incorrect survey responses from the respondents.
I was just going to say, Shauna, if I can pause real quick.
Yeah.
Jared, appreciate the comment and the input there. I guess question, I don't know if you're able to unmute Jared or not, but question would be if listing it as BMX and mountain bike or BMX/mountain bike jumps would be more appropriate. I understand the bicycle skills park, but I'm wondering if that's something that's the first time I've ever heard someone refer to it as bicycle skills park. So just wondering what might be more accurate or most accurate.
Sure. You bring up a good point. Bicycle skills park would probably be like the other side of the coin of my comment. So yeah, anything like that, like bicycle jumps even, right? But just as someone who does probably every one of these activities that people have mentioned, including just, enjoying being at the park, eating some food. Yeah, I just want people to, because I feel like if I was less, involved and I was just filling out a survey, I see that, I'm like, oh, I don't want motorcycles. Like, I'm going to write against that. And I would too. I don't want motorcycles there. So that's fine. Whatever you come up with, I think just the word dirt bike to me, it seemed to give the wrong idea.
Thank you.
Okay, we have just a couple more, and then Gerald, I see you, and we'll have you comment after these. And Sarah, I'm going to combine yours because they're related. So we have the next comment/question. Climbing organizations have already secured funding and presented an erosion control project to City of Tempe for this area. City of Scottsdale has a long-standing relationship with climbing organizations who are park stewards and help with maintenance and preservation. And then as a question, same person is the City of Tempe aware of the climbing management plan in place with McDowell, Sonoran Preserve, and Pinnacle Peak?
Alex, I'm going to let you tackle that question.
No, I guess that is the simplest answer to that question.
Okay, if I can make a comment, please.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so just to clarify, the climbing community has local climbing organizations that have worked with City of Scottsdale and the preserves in Scottsdale to create stewardship programs. And they actually just completed a project last weekend, and they regularly complete projects for maintenance, signage, and education for people in the park, especially climbers, the climbing community, on how to mitigate any off-trail travel and things like that. And trails have been established for climbing as an activity within those preserves to help mitigate any other damage to plants and habitat around those areas. And I also have one comment when I was reviewing the previous feedback that City of Tempe received on the first public input round. I am aware of City of Tempe's equity initiative that you have for, recreation activity inclusion in your parks. And I have worked with a youth organization that specifically works to bring youth of color into outdoor spaces. And one of the locations we use is Papago Park because it's so easily accessible to where they live. And if you prohibit climbing there, we won't be able to take those kids out there and educate them about the area and the history. And when I looked at the survey results from the previous public input session, it was overwhelmingly white and male. So you guys are, by prohibiting climbing or looking at prohibiting climbing in this area, you are removing, the engagement of a huge demographic in Tempe. So I just also wanted to comment about that.
Thank you for your comments, Sarah. We appreciate them. Gerald, I saw you go off camera and I saw you put your comment in the chat, so I'm happy to read it. Or if you wanted to ask or state it in your own voice, please feel free to go ahead and do that.
Yeah, I mean, very similar sentiment to that about the bike park and the climbing area. I use the bike park as well and love it. But same sentiment for the disc golf course. I love being in the desert area, especially as the sun's setting. It's just a beautiful place to be, and I play disc golf rounds there very frequently, as do many of my friends. I really hate to see that go away, and was wondering what I could do to advocate for keeping it and getting involved, and including if that means whatever we can do to mitigate damage or clean up. I know there's a couple clubs that claim that course as home and have made some of the improvements there to signage and other things, and with their own money, and would, I'm sure, be willing to do what's necessary to keep the course.
Thanks, Gerald. A couple of folks from the disc golf community actually attended one of the Desert Conservation Commission meetings earlier this year, and had very fruitful discussion with the commissioners. So appreciate your comments.
For sure. Do you know what the outcome of those were?
There wasn't necessarily any action taken. It was just to share how they were utilizing and some opportunities maybe they saw for improvements too. Right now, if the management plan then identifies ways for staff to better maintain or manage some of the areas such as disc golf, they were just providing some input on what that might look like.
Great. Yeah, I just I know that it's a give and take, and so if there's things we need to do or the clubs need to do to take care of the area in exchange for that being a allowed use, as part of the ordinance, I'm sure we'd be willing to do that.
Thank you. So the next comment and question in the chat is, let's see, I'm also a local climber who has spent time at Papago over the years. I first learned to rappel as a Boy Scout 20 years ago here and have known the area to be some type of practice location for fire rescue services or the Maricopa Search and Rescue volunteers. Is that still true? When I heard that the city was considering banning climbing, I wanted to attend and share my story, and it would be such a shame for the park to forbid such a fun activity. And asking if the city considered speaking with the other local municipalities that allow climbing, Phoenix, Scottsdale, and how they mitigate environmental impact from climbing.
That's something we'll do once we have the final recommendations as to how to what's expected or what the expectations are to move forward, and then how we might implement any of the recommendations. We've been in contact, obviously, with folks in the climbing community. We've had some contact with Phoenix, but not specifically on climbing, just in general terms about preserves and maintenance and management, and then more specifically about their park steward program. But yes, we'll certainly connect with other cities. There there's some elements that are probably consistent across different areas of the valley, and then there are some unique features within Tempe's portion of Papago Preserve that might be a little bit different managing than some other areas around the valley. So we'll have to consider those things as well.
Okay, and I have one more question here in the chat, and then Anthony will come to your hand. Will the Army ROTC be able to use the Papago Park for tactical training by allowing off-trail movement? We don't disturb the area or vegetation when utilizing the area. And based on the briefing, the area we use is not under considerable preservation efforts.
So right now, I know we've been working through that task order, Herman, and for the next semester. Currently, based on the way the code is and preserve prohibited activities in the preserve, people are supposed to stay on trail. So I think, you know, Ruben's response to you previously, working through that task order now, is that we would be essentially, I wouldn't say violating our own policy, but we'd be stepping outside the bounds of the way the code is written. So not to say that being off trail can never happen, but for us to approve that on a regular basis for non-maintenance activities is a difficult thing for us to do.
Okay, and Anthony, you have your hand up?
Yes, I have a comment. Leo Simchokwe, good afternoon. My name is Anthony Perano. I'm an attorney, a rock climber, a Tempe resident, and I'm born and raised Arizona native with ancestral ties to the Sonoran Desert since time immemorial. Given that the park is requesting assistance in determining how to manage and preserve the Hayden Butte and Papago Park preserves for the long term, and that the plan focuses on both the habitat contained within these preserves and the cultural, educational, and recreational opportunities therein, I wanted to provide some comment regarding the plans for climbing. While I support the aims of the preservations for these spaces, I urge the city to consider the effects on intra-generational as well as intergenerational populations when deciding on this plan. As a rock climber and someone with ancestral ties to these lands, I'm concerned with the recent shift in the attitudes towards climbing and the climbing community among the preserves across the valley. Climbing in the Southwest has long been a documented practice, whether it's in the form of recreation or connecting to the natural environment. Many indigenous cultures who call Arizona home have a history of rock climbing to access cliff dwellings, as well as presumably for recreation. The connections to these lands that indigenous peoples hold are deeply intertwined with the natural landscape and environment, and mountains are often culturally and religiously significant. For myself, as well as many other climbers, fostering this deep connection to the natural landscape is facilitated best through rock climbing. It is a spiritual practice as much as a recreational activity. Stemming from that desire for a deep connection with the environment is the drive among climbers to preserve and protect these areas that we love. As you heard, climbers take their responsibility as stewards very seriously, and many, including myself, have expressed their willingness to work with the city in order to determine a safe, sustainable, and responsible plan, guidelines, and regulations regarding climbing in these areas. Additionally, these prohibitions unfairly target a comparably tiny portion of the preserve's users. Climbing is largely limited to pre-established routes in this area. As mentioned, lots of the climbing routes rely on bolts, and this is just due to the geology of the preserve. However, mountain bikes and hikers can roam wherever they please. Climbers cannot. So climbers just, in effect, have a reduced impact on the environment through the nature of their sport. So with this, I just ask that the city continue to support the climbing community within the preserve areas. And as has been mentioned, the climbing community is more than willing to work with the city and is committed to the mission of preserving these areas. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the next question asks for you to please explain section 4.3.18 revegetation and give more details on reestablishing constructed slopes with native plants. Does this apply to the long existing bicycle jumps and trails?
Wayne, do you want to try to expand on that?
Yeah, I don't have a copy of the document in front of me, so I would need just a little more information about the question.
So I'll try my best here. So basically, when there's reference to revegetation, that's just going to be generally across the preserves. If there's opportunities or areas that have been disturbed, that we would look to revegetate with, native plants, native seeds, those types of things. Some of that would help with erosion control, as mentioned in your comment or question there about slopes. And then specifically to the bicycle jumps area. If for some reason those bicycle jumps were not there, then yes, there would be we would attempt to revegetate that area. But as of now, that's you'd have to read further into the recommendations. I can't remember the recommendation number, but it's under consideration still. The recommendation, I can't remember the exact wording, basically is to evaluate those. If those jumps areas are to be reestablished and revegetated as natural native land, then we would look as a city to try to find some other areas where it may be more appropriate to have something like that. I don't know. Hopefully that answers the question.
If I could go a little further on that, Alex, the recommendation and the procedures for restoration with native plants and the revegetation, based on what I heard about the section that was being discussed, was really intended to be a guideline for all restoration activities, not just those within the bike jump area. So I don't know if that was the focus of the question or not, but the idea is that because of the vegetation type that we have in the preserves, it would be the same level of treatment, although there might be slightly differences because the steeper the slopes, the more difficult they are to maintain, but essentially the revegetation process is the same.
Christine, did you need any other clarification around that?
Hi, thank you for asking. I guess I was just interested, like others who had joined and spoke on this, about the preservation or the continued use of those bike trails. And so when I see things like slope management or slope management, I just wanted to learn more about that. I see later in the document, section 4.33, where it says it is recommended the city consider removing the dirt jumps. And I was just curious, the committee or city, their take on, revising the improvement of land to then preserve it as pseudo natural, I guess, and if that even makes sense to do, or who has recommended the removal of the dirt jumps, if that's a formal recommendation, or if that's just input from some community members.
I think the recommendation is collectively between all the discussions, community input, feedback, obviously discussion with city staff, other stakeholders. But as you had said, as you read it, the recommendation, as I understand it, written right now, is to consider removing, and then if it is, to be explored further, to look for other opportunities to move it or replace it, to still offer that same recreational amenity for the community. And then as far as the slopes and the trails, I'm not sure if I completely understand, but all the trails that run throughout, we'll say Papago Preserve as an example, there are tons of so-called spider trails. And so I believe there's a recommendation in there to consolidate those trails and eliminate the spider trails and establish, or try to better establish, sort of permanent trails. And then if that's the case, those spider trails, when and if eliminated, we would then look to revegetate those areas. And that might have been what some of the reference was towards for revegetation.
Yeah, partially. So when I was reading spider trails and revegetation and slope rehabilitation, that's just where, you could imagine that jump area then being the target, but it, as I now read later, 4.33 does recommend to consider removing, so it does seem to support that.
Yeah, and just one other point on the trails. So it's my understanding that there aren't any recommendations in there to eliminate bicycle use through the preserves or trails in general. It's just really to remove some of the spider trails and have more well-established trails, which will assist with long-term management of the entire preserve.
And then Alex, just still seeking clarification on disc golf course users. Is there anything in the plan recommending a change to what currently exists for the course?
There is not unless I missed it. There is not. So
Okay.
there's not a recommendation to change or remove that element.
Awesome,
That is
thank you.
That is my recollection as well.
Okay, great. And then Jared, if you want to come off mute, you have a question about bicycle jumps?
Yeah, absolutely. Listening to the discussion that was had with Christine, I just have some additional thoughts there. I want to share a little bit about success of similar situations that we've had fairly recently, both with the city of Mesa as well as with the USFS, the Forest Service. So there's a similar area to these jumps. So these jumps, have been here for roughly 20 years. For the most part, they've been well maintained. I do understand that a free for all is not the best, way to continue that sustainability. However, in the cases of this place called Hawes is what people call it. Technically, it's on Tonto National Forest. We had the same situation where there were jumps and this and that for 20 years, and there was enough volunteer power there and enough people to even just down to the individual levels, like one or two core people who are speaking on behalf of their peers about how they can keep it and whatnot. And so in the case of Hawes, that required no investment from the Forest Service. There was quite a bit of money that was raised because of considerations like historical artifacts and geology studies with the soil because of its proximity to the Salt River, etc. So that was a lot more complicated, and we got through it. But the simpler example would be the Desert Trails Bike Park in Mesa. There was some unofficial stuff there. But there was funding granted from the city of Mesa. I am not aware of any plans from the city of Tempe to create a grant or anything like that. But I will say that there's people are spending so much money on mountain bikes as a community. We would probably be able to crowdsource a professional build to include jumps that satisfy different standards that you might want to have versus a DIY. And I know that as a community, raising the money would actually probably be easier than getting us to come into these meetings. So I just want to leave you with those successes as something to think about. The nature of the people using these jumps, I mean, there's not the normal mountain biker because these aren't mountains. It's a very DIY, blue collar sort of effort. But, we do have the, a core group of individuals there that maintain, and they call themselves the Papago Park Trails Association. Cameron Espinoza, maybe someone who has spoken in this forum or elsewhere before that you may be familiar with. He, tries to lead this, group of younger adults in, our goal of having jumps. We just want some jumps they don't exist on City of Phoenix or any of the other bigger preserves. And it is something that's really important, and it is very accessible. You don't need, a $10,000 mountain bike to go off these jumps. So I just want to, let you know about those successes, and that it is tangible, and I think we can find a way to keep them, even if it comes down to having to fund it. But I do hope that we can keep it in its DIY spirit of these are the set of jumps and this trail that we are going to continue having, that's approved, et cetera, at the end of this. And we would love to continue to maintain what we've already built. It means a lot to a lot of people. But I do think that, the 20 years we have to show for it, can be something tangible where, if you were to come in and say, these are the jumps and these are the ones that are, we not spider trails, et cetera, we can, focus on that, keep them maintained, and, there's no spend involved. So I just wanted to reiterate, the variety of options that we have, but the preference is to keep what's there, even if it means defining it a little bit better about what exactly we are allowed to do and which ones are kept, et cetera. So I just wanted to share a little bit of the regional history that, various government bodies and the mountain biking community in general have had in this area.
Thanks, Jared. Really appreciate your comments. Papago Trail Builders actually they've attended a Desert Conservation Commission meeting as well. So they've provided some information to our commission. And then I've 2 points. Your timing's impeccable bringing up Hawes. I wasn't aware of it, but yesterday afternoon actually had a different meeting on a different topic, but some folks from the biking community, and it wasn't about biking necessarily, but they actually mentioned that same project. And then I have talked with, or we have as a city talked with the city of Mesa as well about their park that's out in East Mesa. And also I've talked with recently a for-profit company, a private company that actually is working with Mesa now, I believe, on possibly developing some other spaces. They weren't involved with the development out there now that's in existence, but they've actually came out, and I met them out at the BMX, the bicycle area in Papago Preserve, for them to just take a quick look at it. And we had a quick conversation about it. So we are communicating with some of the other local municipalities, like you said, with Mesa and their bike park area.
Thank you so much, and I'm happy to hear that the city of Tempe is out there, learning from our neighboring communities, and actually seeking feedback, as well as the feedback that we're providing. So that makes me feel good, and hopefully we will be able to continue voicing and working with you.
Thank you.
So thank you again to everyone who's joined us and for your questions today. I did put the direct link for both for the website that has the survey as well as the draft plan currently posted. If you think of another question, we're all available, or you're welcome to join us in person tonight at 6 p.m. We'll be at our North Tempe Multi-Generational Center. Alex or Wayne, was there anything else you wanted to add?
Nothing from me, just reiterate, please review the working draft plan, and complete the survey. We'd love your feedback.
I would reiterate Alex's comments and just say how much we appreciate people taking the time to provide us the feedback.
All right, thank you so much, everyone.